Welcome back to the Talkoffame podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Montigney, and today I'm introducing you to Andrea Sampson. She is the co-founder of Talk Boutique and an expert in the transformative power of storytelling. Andrea's extensive experience in speaker coaching and her pivotal role in shaping leaders' communication skills make her a prime figure in the narrative-driven change movement. At Talk Boutique, she specializes in equipping TEDx speakers and executives with the tools to create impactful storytelling that drives business growth. Welcome to Andrea. I literally so excited to have you on. I literally have so many questions to ask you.
Kylie, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for asking me to be here. I'm excited to share all of my knowledge with you and your listeners.
Same here. So, what was the inspiration behind Talk Boutique? The work that you guys have been doing over the last couple of years has been amazing. I know you had experience with a similar thing before you started this, but kind of give us a little backstory on why you started.
Sure. So I had spent most of my career in advertising. I spent almost 25 years working for some of the largest agency networks in the world on some of the world's most recognizable brands. And towards the end of my agency world, I was a strategist and a planner, which meant that I did all kinds of work with research and understanding consumer behavior. And we would come down to something we called a key consumer insight, which was what all of the ad campaigns you would see in market were based on. And I had come to a point in my career where I realized I was an idealist in a capitalist world. And it was time for me to make a change. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I started doing some volunteer work. And one of the places that I was very fortunate to volunteer, to be asked to volunteer for, was TEDx Toronto. And this was in the early days of the TEDx movement. And so I started off as a speaker's coach. I didn't even know what a speaker's coach was, quite frankly. But in advertising, most of my work, I would present 3, 4 times a day. So I thought, oh, yeah, I got this. I can do it. But TEDx proved to be a real training ground for me, and it helped me to understand the power of story. And it helped me to find a skill that I didn't know I had, which was identifying a core idea that came from my ability to create a key consumer insight. I had been trained for many, many years on how to take large swatches of data and define them down into one core idea and then to build. And what TEDx taught me was to build a story around that idea so that others understood the complexity and the impact that that idea could have. And so that really spurred on me with a passion. And for the next 4 years, I volunteered. I was speakers coach. I was head curator, and I eventually became the chair of TEDx Toronto, running the entire event. And I came to a point. I took a sabbatical from advertising, and and I remember, at one point thinking, what am I going to do? I got to earn money at some point,
Mhm.
and what am I going to do? And that was the impetus for starting Talk Boutique. What I did was, somebody said to me, you can get paid as a speaker's coach. And I said, no one would ever pay for that. And, the reality was, they would. And not only would they pay for it, but it was the basis of my passion, because I loved doing what I was doing, because I was working with some of the smartest people I had ever met, people who were doing big things in the world. They were creating change. And I saw in the TED world a world that I wasn't getting access to anywhere else. As an advertising executive, you would think that I had a pretty good take on what was happening around me. But the reality was the media and all the inputs that we have to help us to understand what's going on in the world are very biased. And we all know that today. Um, and so I saw this world that had hope. I saw a world where good work was being done, a world where we all should know about. And so when I decided to start my company, I decided I wanted to help those who were doing good work in the world, but were so busy doing that work, they were forgetting to tell anyone about it. And we all needed to know about that work, because in the end of the day, what we all need more than anything in this world is to see that work because it gives us hope for the future. We're all co-creating together. So that was the impetus for starting Talk Boutique, helping those who wanted to be on a TED stage and maybe for whatever reason didn't make it there, but still had the opportunity to share their work. And so I created a platform where I helped them to build their ideas, build story around it, and then build a platform to share that through our Speakers Bureau. And that's where it all started.
I love literally everything you said. Basically, I love a point that you brought up earlier about the media being biased. Like that is something that is happening more and more every day. And it's something that a lot of people really see and sometimes don't even realize because media bias can come in many different ways and it shows. But I have a question for you. So, when people hear speaker coach or coach speaker or whatever, um, what exactly is that? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
is a
What
speaker?
is that work? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And great question. Like I said, I didn't know what a speaker's coach was. I had never heard of it. But what we do as speaker coaches is we work with individuals and helping them to, first of all, define their narrative. So, what is the one idea you want to get out into the world? And that's always the hardest question because every speaker I've ever worked with says, well, I've got a million things I want to get out in the world. But the reality is there's one idea that holds it all. And that's what we do. We first define that idea. What is the core idea you want to get out into the world that is going to make the biggest impact? And then what we do is we find a way to build story around that idea so that it creates context and understanding and memorability of that idea. And once we have the idea and the story, now we build out the narrative, the entire talk. So if you think of a TED talk, it's anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes in duration. And so we would build out all of that narrative because it's not all story, although story lives through everything, but there'll be facts and data and support. There might even be anecdotes or even smaller stories that live inside of that. So we build it all. So we work with you first on your narrative. We get the narrative built. Then we work with you on how to perform that narrative because how you show up on stage or in front of any audience, it could be in front of a boardroom, it could be in front of a camera on a podcast. How you show up is as important and sometimes more important than the words you're saying. Because if you're not showing up in a way that's engaging, the words you're saying don't get heard. So we work with you on your performance skills, everything from your face to your body to your voice to your presence. And so we're working through all of those pieces. And how do you take the words that you've built into your narrative and perform them in a way that the audience hears them, understands them, and remembers them?
Because when you're speaking, it's not just doing it on a public stage, let's just say in Toronto. It could be talking to a video camera or talking in front of like a group setting or something. I don't know. It can come in many
Yeah, of
different
course.
ways. It's just not one specific thing. And that's something a lot of people get confused on is that like when they speak to maybe a group of people, they're like, well, this is not a speaking engagement. This is people that I generally know. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
like that is something that can prep you for talking in front of maybe hundreds or thousands of people. Is starting off small, or maybe with a
that's
group
right.
of friends or family, and then growing to maybe a couple hundred thousand people. And when I'm doing the TED next month in New York City, that's something that I'm literally the most afraid of is the hundreds of people going to be there. And that I'm
Right.
sure that impacts a lot of people as well. But that's kind of one of the biggest things is knowing that many people are going to be there, which is crazy.
Yeah. And so I think what you're saying is that like that that moment. So there's a couple of I'll unpack some of what you've just said. So there's, whether you're speaking in front of, an audience of hundreds or even thousands that you can see in an auditorium, or whether you're standing in front of a boardroom presenting to a room full of 10 people, or whether you're sitting at your dinner table talking to your family, regardless of what that audience looks like and the size, the reality is you are performing. You're always performing. And the words you're saying and the impact you're making with those words is equally as important, because the audience, that's your first, that's
Mhm.
where you should be most concerned. It's not about you, it's actually about your audience. And so, when we get nervous, because we all get nervous when we stand in, whenever, even we're, like I said, even speaking at the dinner table with people, if it's something you care about, you get nervous
Mhm.
because you care about what you're saying and you care about the audience you're saying it to. And so nerves are a good thing because they mean you care. That's
Mhm.
important, right? And then the next thing is, nerves are also a part of you wanting to make sure you're saying the right words, that they're getting it across. And this is why it's so important that you work on your narrative before you get in front of an audience, especially if you're going to step on a TED stage, right? So what is the narrative that you are doing? You've got a short amount of time, like I said, probably 10 to 12 minutes. Most TED Talks these days sort of fall into that time range. And within that, you got a lot to say, and every word is important. So have you developed the narrative in such a way that you can easily remember it and get out that 12-minute talk
Mhm.
um, with confidence? So that's the first thing. So working on that and making sure you've got the words written or said. And it's not to say that you have a script. Often what we do when we're working with TED speakers is we give them a narrative map. And so what we do is we develop, first of all, what's the opening? And the opening is typically the beginning of your story. That story leads to your idea. And so we build the bridge between the story and the idea. That idea then breaks into three key messages. You're breaking down the idea in a way that people can understand it. The story lives in those three key messages. And there are ways in which you're going to bridge to a message, to the support, to the takeaway, to the message, to the support, the takeaway, to the message, the support, the takeaway. That's the body of the talk. And that story that you opened with is going to live in all of those. And then you close that talk. You close it by going back to that opening story, to a little piece that you left dangling, something that you said to the audience that got them interested, had them leaning in, but you didn't finish telling them. And you did that purposely so that on the close, you could come back and bring it back. And they go, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. What happened? And then you finish your story and you tell them again your idea, because you've just told them the entire talk. Now you tell them that idea again, and you close with your call to action. And
Mhm.
that is the way in which you deliver a TED Talk. So that's a map. That's a map of content. And so remembering it, you just have to remember each one of those pieces
Mhm.
as opposed to remembering every word you're going to say. Because if you've rehearsed it, if you've written it, if you've done the work and you know your core idea and the story, everything else will come. So
Mhm.
stepping out onto that stage and just knowing your message map
Mhm.
is going to help you so much. And then just understanding what to do with your body. How do you use your body to convey? Remember that one of the most important parts of your body is your face, because everyone looks at it, right? And so what's your face doing while you're talking? What should it be doing? Well, number one, when appropriate, smiling, because it's the way in which we engage our audience the most.
Mhm.
Um, Next is using your eyebrows and your eyes to convey emotion. These are ways in which, and we do it naturally when we're talking to friends, but when we get on a stage and everyone's looking at us, we're like, oh my God. And our face suddenly goes blank. We forget that we have this beautiful emotion conveyor to be able to engage them. And then what do you do with your hands? Well, your hands are such an important part of speaking. And think about when you're normally talking, you're using your hands as gestures. You should be doing the same thing when you're on stage.
You literally just answered all my questions involving this, so this is perfect. I love all the information they just gave. That is so helpful. And I like literally, like personally, with the the TED talk is 4 to 5 minutes. So
Right.
basically, everything's kind of like crammed in. So basically, it's not as long as maybe some things that you are familiar with, it's with a TED Toronto. Well, hopefully, this 4 or 5 minutes we were able to fit in as much as possible, which is good. But to go back into your career in advertising, like why did you kind of leave a 20 plus career in advertising open Talk Boutique? I know you mentioned this a bit before, but kind of give us kind of more
Yeah, sure.
information about that.
So, working in advertising, I started in advertising late for most people. I started there just after my child was born when I think I was about 30 when I started. And I had spent the early part of my career in fundraising. And I got into advertising with this belief, I'd come from the fundraising world where we always had never had enough money, but we always had lots of passion and hope of trying to create change in the world.
Mhm.
And suddenly I found myself in the advertising world with clients who had in comparatively had so much money and were doing so much. And I had this belief that I could create social change through through advertising. Now, of course, we're always selling products in advertising, but I, would believe that maybe I can influence the ads in such a way that they are more diverse or that we're addressing some of the world's most pressing issues through the narrative of the ad. And so as a secondary goal, bring in some of these really important things that really impact who we are. I always have been a passionate, purpose-driven individual and wanting to create a future that is hopeful and more reflective of all of us. And so all throughout my career, I spent a lot of time really trying to do those things. And I think what happened for me was I came to a point where I realized I wasn't going to be able to create the change that I really wanted to make. The year that I turned 50, I started to take a hard look at my life and go, what were my goals for me in my life? And, when we set our goals, we're young. We're often, in our teens or early 20s, and we're sort of looking out at this long life that we have. And we have some goals that we want to achieve. And for me, as I looked at all of them, and, like it was everything from life goals, like I wanted to get married and have a child and own a house and, be an impactful part of society. And then my career goals, I wanted to build a career and have a big title and earn, ample amounts of funds. And at 50, I looked back on my life and realized I'd achieved all of those. And so where from here? What did I really want for this next part of my life as I'm looking out
Mhm.
at a number of years that are fewer in front of me than were behind me. And what I realized was I actually wanted to leave a legacy in this world, a legacy of actual impact, of creating a better future for those who would come after me. And I didn't know how to do that, but I did know that advertising wasn't it. And I knew that the capitalist world of advertising was no longer matching my idealism. I truly was an idealist in a capitalist world. And so I needed to do something else. And that was why, I just started volunteering. I started using the skills that I had in advertising for different, and I did many different volunteer roles throughout that time. And it was really eye-opening for me with looking at what else was happening in the world. And that transition into the TED world was probably the most impactful because of seeing the world through a new lens and seeing the work that was actually happening. And I started to understand that making an impact in this world, I may not be the person who's discovering how we can reverse climate change or how we can cure, cancer. But I can help the person that's doing that to communicate better because that was my gift. That was my skill. And by communicating better, that would help them get the support that they needed to either get the funds or to rally the people or to create the awareness so that the work they're doing got it made impact. And so that was the beginning of me on my own impact journey and really starting to understand that just because I may not be trained as a scientist or an academic
Mm.
doesn't mean that I can't still make change in this world. And
Mm.
it was a really, really big awareness for me.
You made such a good point because you don't have to be trained to be good at something.
That's
And
it.
that is something that a lot of people think about, and that's what mostly holds people back is that you need training to get into a specific thing, but you can go in it with no training, but probably previous experience in a different career field. Well,
Well,
with you going into advertising and then switching over to go kind of TED Ed, like advertising and fundraising kind of align in some sort of form. Like, of course, when
of
advertising,
course.
that's what makes you get fundraising for most
Yeah.
people, like campaigns and everything. But, after these last couple of years, advertising has been very big in some shape or form in the latest couple of years. But it has changed. Like it really
A
has
lot.
changed the industry, the way people advertise things. Like it has changed, and no matter, and especially with social media, it is such a big form of advertising that I'm sure you have dealt with, know much more about it than I do personally. But with that, it really does play a big role in advertising and fundraising because that's how people get their money through social media and advertising, whether it's on TV or even social media, it does play a massive role.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing about advertising and as I look at the work that I do now, and I say this all the time because today I do more than speakers coaching, more thought leader coaching. I work with individuals who are stepping into their thought leadership. And the difference really is that, as a speakers coach, I worked with people on narrative only, but now what we're looking at is how are you creating impact with the narratives that you're creating and with the thinking that you bring into this world. And when we're doing that, one of the first things I always say to them is, look, there has never been a better time in the history of humanity to be able to get messages out. When I first started in advertising, if you wanted to get a message out, you either had to hope that you would put something out in the world through public relations. You might do a press release, as an example, and hope that somebody thinks it's interesting enough to talk about it. So you couldn't directly talk about the thing that you were doing in any form of mass media. You either had to hope somebody else did, or you had to buy airtime. So whether that be through TV or radio, or because these were in the days before social media, right? And even from a social media perspective, when that started to become something that we had access to, few people were actually stepping up because even the platforms originally didn't have the impact that the platforms have today. But here we are in this amazing world where you and I are on a podcast impacting thousands, maybe millions of people. And
Mhm.
there's literally no cost to this for anyone. The total cost of being on a podcast these days is the microphone that you're speaking into, the webcam you're looking at, or the recording device you're using. And you just put your message out there. And so suddenly we have this ability to create impact with millions of people just from our own homes using literally our phones. And this is such a powerful time to be alive and to be using these mediums because they're no longer, you know, the exclusive realm of advertisers. We
Mhm.
get to jump on and do whatever we want, whether it be, start a YouTube channel or go on TikTok or, go on Instagram, or start a podcast and be on across all of those platforms.
Mhm.
We can use our voices to create change from wherever we are with whatever we have.
Mhm.
Coming back to the issue of training, I dropped out of high school in grade 10. I never graduated from university. I have been self-taught my entire career. And it has been training. I've taken many, many courses. I went to colleges at night. I went to university at night. I did things like TEDx where I learned things. What's most important is that you show up with passion and with purpose, and that you do the work that's necessary to train yourself. So, I always like to say there's the University of YouTube today, and it's a fantastic way to learn things, but try it out. Whatever it is that you think you want to do, go learn a little bit, then go and practice it, and go and learn a little bit more and practice some more, and use these amazing platforms that we have to use your voice.
Like that is so well said. Oh my gosh. Like you were literally spitting out what I was going to say, honestly. But to like with social media, lean advertising, nowadays, to advertise on like a radio, TV, or whatever, it costs hundreds to thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
And with podcasting, it's basically all free unless you want to buy a little microphone or a
Yeah.
camera for like 30 bucks. So it's not much as maybe advertising on TV or radio because it has gone up the latest couple of years with how big television has gotten and everything. But it really has played such a big role in the way we advertise, whether it's on TV, radio, social media, or even podcasting. It does play such a big role. And even with everything going on, you can use your voice for podcasting or even social media instead of paying thousands of dollars. Like with posting on social media and podcasting, it's literally completely free. You just do it in your own home. Doesn't really have to pay anything. It's just less stress and it's a better way to get your message out there because people really listen to podcasts more than radio or television nowadays.
Well, and also because it's not paid. So here's the difference between looking at paid media versus what we like to call organic media. This would fall under organic. Paid media, that that's a prepared message. Somebody is trying to sell you something, right? That's what paid media does. You
Mhm.
don't buy media just because you want to spend money on media. You buy it because you want it to do something, right? So I want you to buy my product or to believe my idea or to buy into my concept. So I'm going to spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, maybe on TV, radio, out of home, social media. I'm going to go into all of these paid media channels, and I'm going to convince you with my messages that you should believe what I believe. But in organic media, in unpaid media, so whether it be social podcasting, all of these platforms,
Mhm.
it's I'm now just talking to you. I'm not paying for this. You believe me or not believe me. But the thing is, you feel it's more authentic. It's not prepared. And so unpaid media often gets more um, believability than
Mhm.
paid media.
True.
And it has deeper impact because you're really hearing about the authentic approach that somebody has. It's not some message that's been scripted by a copywriter and beautifully designed by a designer. It's now that person showing up as who they are from where they are with what they know, offering something that they hope will help. And
Mhm.
that's the beauty of the world we live in today. We all get to do that.
And with podcasting, you just be yourself. Don't really have to follow a script. It's more conversation based than
Yeah,
most social media channels like radio or TV. Like most radio ads or interviews are like maybe 1 to 2 minutes at
that's
least.
it. Yeah,
And with podcasting, some people do it from 10 minutes to an hour at
yeah,
the most. So it's literally more conversation based than most TV or radio stations, just because of radio time and pay coverage, whatever it is. But with
yeah.
podcasting, you literally connect with so many people longer and you get to share their stories and connect with them more than you would on television.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, like I said, it's more believable because that conversation, like, look at the conversation we've just had. We've gone all over the place, we've talked about lots of things. And the reality is, your listeners have gotten to know me better than probably some of my staff have gotten to know me. Why? Because you've asked great questions. And because you've asked those great questions, it's allowed me to talk a little bit about who I am and what I believe. And it's true, like I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to sell anything. We're just having a great conversation that we both hope will help somebody else find their voice. And
Mm.
that's part of what we do, right?
Yeah, that's the most important thing, as long as they hear these stories and connect with your story and the other stories, that's the most important thing. We need to get stories out there because not a lot of people get to share their stories nowadays, whether it's TED, your
Mhm.
family or friends or whatever. Every story deserves to be heard.
Well, stories change the world. And why? Well, because our lives are one big long story. And when I tell you my story, here's kind of the cool thing about storytelling and brain science is that your brain starts to think about times when you've been in a similar situation, and it starts populating my story with your memories. And
Mhm,
so we start aligning. We start going, oh my God, that happened to me. And
mhm,
now my story, which holds an idea, right? Because I'm telling you my story with an idea inside of it. And now you're hearing your own story and you're like, oh my God, you're right. I never thought of it in that way. And
mhm,
so now you have a new understanding and a new way to remember. And it helps you to go, I not only do I want to tell that story, I want to think about how that idea has
mhm,
impacted my life in new ways and what I can now do because now I understand it in a new way. And that's what stories are. They're the context that help us to understand and remember the things that we want to create or the ways that we want to be or the things that we want to remember so that we can create the impact that we want to create.
I love it. So that is the best way to wrap up this episode. I love absolutely filming this episode with you. You are literally amazing, and the work that you're doing is definitely making a difference. But I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to come on the podcast. It means so much. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge to our listeners. It means so much.
Well, thank you so much, Kylie. This has been an absolute pleasure. And, I'd love to offer your listeners, if they are interested, we have a great, what we call the storytelling toolkit, and would love for them to be able to get that and to offer it to you as well. And it's just a series of frameworks that we use with our clients, and it helps them to become storytellers because we both agree stories are really important. So I'll send you, maybe you could drop the link in the show notes, and if anyone is interested they can download that.
Yeah, I will make sure to put that in the show notes for everyone that is interested or just wants to learn more. I'll make sure to put that below. But thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, and review for more episodes coming out. This is going to be an exciting few weeks.